The webinar has started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. 15, 18, 20 of you, wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Abstract to Action. This is our wonderful, wonderful keynote with your amazing Delaware leaders here. Fabulous. Yeah, give us a shout out in the chat. Where are you coming from? Where are you? Your name, hello, in whatever language you choose, and then we'll hand it over to Maria for the introduction. Welcome, welcome. Hola, Kimberly. Wonderful. Welcome. Segor. Beautiful. Yay. Look at this. Woo. Lindsay's here, Jenna. Wow, good to see everyone. Hey, that's pretty fast. People have really come in quickly. Carla's here, Ashley, Amanda. Wow, Kimberly. Hey, Nellie, all right. Emily too. Lots of people from Christina School District, that's awesome. All right. In just a moment, we'll hand it right over. All right, Elizabeth, Nancy. Excellent. Right on.
Right, it is my pleasure to introduce James Nottingham. He's the co-founder of Challenging Learning. He is the author of 11 books and numerous articles about high-quality instruction to get learners thinking. He is the creator of the Learning Pit to help deepen understanding of the learning process. He is a renowned international speaker, and in 2020, he was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts for outstanding achievements to social progress and development. He joins us in Delaware today to share some of the best ways to strengthen learning in schools, preschools, and colleges. He is joined by his colleague, Carmen Bergman, who is Managing Director for Challenging Learning. She is also co-creator for key aspects of online services, including book studies, conferences, and lesson plan downloads, host of Challenging Learning's introductory and in-depth webinar series, co-author of Schools Out, Learning's In, and principal author of the Challenging Learning blog. Carmen has been a teacher, principal, director of education, and assistant superintendent for a regional office of education, advising and supporting schools in 30 school districts in central Illinois. They are calling in from Britain. James and Carmen, welcome to Delaware.
Thank you very much indeed. It's an absolute delight to be joining you all this afternoon or this evening for me. I'm going to share my screen if I can, and get that going for us. Is that on the screen? Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. It's a privilege to be with you all, and thank you everybody for joining us. I have to admit I'm not multilingual. I used to be completely fluent in British Sign Language. My first job in a school was working in a school for deaf children. But that was almost 30 years ago. In fact, it's probably more than 30. I hate to admit that, but anyhow, I feel almost as a fraud joining you all as a monolinguist that I am. But all being well, I've got some things to share with you that you'll find useful in your extremely important job that you do. The slides that I'm going to use, you can find a copy at an event page that one of Carmen and my colleagues have put together. So you can see that. I've just flashed that up down the bottom right-hand side of the screen. It is case sensitive, so it does need to be capitals for DDOE. And then a capital M as well, and you'll get that bit.ly link. Will take you straight to an event page where you can find most of the slides that I plan to use this afternoon. And then by the end of the day, all the slides that I've used will be there. Maria, thank you for mentioning the books that I've written. That is an image of the books, and I'd like to draw your attention to a couple that connect primarily to what we're doing this afternoon. This one, The Learning Pit, that's the short guide to the Learning Pit, and I'll be talking about that this afternoon. And then Challenging Learning Through Dialogue. I'll also mention the Learning Pit, and so you'll find lots and lots and lots of images online for that. I'd like to start, though, talking about dialogue. This is John Hattie, and that's the older guy, the good-looking one, that's me. John Hattie, he and I have done a lot of work together. We do conferences together. Our company, Carmen and I, used to run visible learning in the Nordic countries up here in Northern Europe, and so worked very closely with John Hattie on many, many tours together. And the most recent one, pre-pandemic, did a series of interviews with him to share his thoughts wider. And very, very briefly, I guess everybody's heard of him, but very briefly, he is the creator of the largest database of educational research. He's taken other people's research, other people's meta-analyses, and compared them one against the other to see what is it that makes the biggest difference to student learning. It doesn't give us all the answers by any means, but it does give us some really important indicators. And one thing that he's found is that if you take all of those meta-analyses and look at how much progress students make in 1 year, then the average effect is 0.4. So anything more than 0.4 means that students are learning more than average, and less than 0.4 means they're learning less than average. So I asked him, out of all of that, all those meta-analyses, that huge database that you've created, was there anything that really surprised you? And without a moment's hesitation, he said the factor that surprised him most was student dialogue. He said, I knew that feedback would make a difference. I knew that parental aspirations would make a difference. I knew that language in the home would make a difference. Technology, relationships particularly would make a difference. But I didn't realize quite the power of student dialogue. And he said the effect of that is 0.82. That means students learn twice as much in the same amount of time. That's extraordinary. When we get our kids talking about their learning together, sharing their ideas, thinking out loud, then it has the potential to double the rate of learning. Now, we often hear that feedback is one of the biggest effects. Well, the typical effective feedback is 0.64. So dialogue beats feedback. Now, I'm not saying it's either or, let's go for both. But if you want to see the whole interview, then you can check it out on our channel, the Challenging Learning channel on Vimeo. So let's break that down a bit more. Let's take the main meta-analysis within that research. And it's done by Murphy and her colleagues. She gathered together 42 studies and looked at, so what is it that we see as an impact on with student dialogue when we get students talking about their learning. And the key ones were text comprehension, general comprehension about concepts and ideas that people are talking about. One aspect that teachers often find difficult to teach, and that is inference. It seems that that's a pretty abstract and a very complex skill, and yet dialogue really seriously helps students' ability to infer and deduce from what other people are saying. As we well know, that's a big part of language learning, because it's not just the concrete, but it's the abstract and it's everything in between. I was coming from that background of being a sign language user. Once upon a time, I was fascinated by the Coda film that won the Oscars recently, and the conversation about how you interpret from English into American Sign Language. And for example, there was a phrase, do it enough and you become it. But the problem is, in sign language, there's no sign for it. So how do you translate that phrase when there's no word or sign for it? And so it became do it again and again, and do things again and again and again, and quite soon you will become those things. Now, that's a heck of a lot more signing to take place. And so inferring, when you hear a phrase like do it often enough, you become it, inferring what that means, understanding what that means, is an extraordinarily complex thing to do. And so dialogue is one of the things that can really help our students get at that. Critical thinking, and of course, critical thinking includes reasoning. So I'm going to look at dialogue. I'm going to look at what's going on with dialogue. What does it mean to engage our students in dialogue? I'm going to look at what's the current state of affairs at the moment in terms of dialogue in our classrooms. But for now, I'm going to pause and see if one of our lovely colleagues on the screen would like to make a comment at this point.
Well, this just resonates so much with learning language. I can't imagine learning a language without practicing it and talking. And then likewise, when we speak to learning language and content simultaneously, here you have it right here. So this really resonates deeply on many levels.
Great, thank you. Well, that's a great segue then into, so what's going on in our classrooms then? Let's look at some of that research. How much opportunity is there for student dialogue? And folks listening at home or in school or wherever you are, I'm going to ask you to pop in your ideas into the chat function. I haven't got the chat on my screen because apparently men can't multitask, so I'm trying not to get involved in that. But and Carmen will keep an eye on your responses and let me know what's going on there. But let me ask you to consider this then. What do you think is the percentage of time that teachers talk? Do you think that teachers talk more or less to older grades? And do you think that class size makes a difference? I'm going to give you some options so that you can just bang in sort of the shall we say, multi-choice options. This research incidentally comes from Gad-Yer. So do you think that teachers talk less than 50% of the time, or more than 50, more than 60, more than 70, more than 80, more than 90? And please, I hope nobody says, oh, I talk 100% of the time. But what do you think is the average average amount of time that we talk? Do you think that we talk more or less or about the same to older grades? And finally, do you think that class size makes a difference? Do we talk more in bigger classes, more in smaller classes, or do you think it makes no difference? So I'll pause there for a moment, pop in your responses. So pick one from A, B, C, D, E, F, or G, and then one from H, I, and J, and then one from K, L, and M, and we'll see what's coming up. Carmen, any takers so far?
Yeah, so quite a few like C's, D's, and E's. It's hard because there's a lot coming in quickly. And then a number of H's. So is that, and then some saying more with older kids, more at older grades. And then for the last one, quite a few K's, but some L's too.
Okay.
Few M's.
Okay. Well,
yeah,
I'm
but
going
for the
to be
top question, it looks like a lot of C, D, and E.
C's, D's, and E's. So
Yep.
Most people think teachers talk quite a lot. Okay. All right. And Carmen, is it right to say that most people think that we're talking more in older grades, or is it, have I misinterpreted what you've just said?
Yeah, I would say a lot of H's. Yeah, more H's
Right.
than.
Okay.
than
And
I's,
then
yeah.
for the class size?
K, M, L. That one's kind of mixed, but I would say in skimming, it looks like I see more K's.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, drum roll, please, everybody. I'm waiting for. Thank you very much. Drum roll, please, for the answers. And so, the first one is more than 70% of the class time is taken up with us blethering on and on and on and on. Which, okay, we've normally got very fascinating, interesting things to say, but if we are talking for that amount of time, that's vastly, vastly reducing the amount of time that our students have got for talk. Now, of course, sometimes they talk at the same time as us, but in terms of the structured opportunity to engage with each other, engage with us, that doesn't leave an awful lot of time if we are talking so much. As for the grades, it turns out the older the students are, the more likely we are to fill that air time, which might be because the youngest kids never ever shut up. But I'm sure that it's also something to do with the shall we say, the technical aspects or the specific content that we're covering. But nonetheless, it's even more worrying with the older grades that the amount of time that they've got to talk is less and less and less. And the thing that surprises most people is it turns out the smaller the class size, the more we talk. And actually, I don't know if you've heard of John Hattie before now, then I guess you might also associate that the headline, John Hattie says class size does not matter. And that was one of the first things associated with John Hattie 10 years ago or so, and it lost him a lot of friends when he said class size does not matter. Problem was that he never actually said that. I mean, that came from the headline writers, and what he actually said was class size does not matter as much as we first thought it would. If you see teachers teaching very big classes, it turns out we're very good at teaching big classes. We're well used to teaching big classes. There's also a problem that when we teach smaller classes, we tend to teach the same way. And if our pedagogy doesn't change, then guess what? The outcomes don't change so much. And it turns out that the smaller the classes, the more we talk. So one thing getting in the way of student dialogue is that we're talking too much. Another thing that's getting in the way is only 5 to 10% of our dialogue, of our conversation, of the things we say, trigger student conversation. And what the research is very clear about is student engagement is higher when we talk less. And for everybody listening in, I'm sure you'll find it fascinating to know this is especially true for at-risk and MLL students. Now, that doesn't mean we go in and mime. It doesn't mean we go in and say nothing. But I would suggest to you that these statistics that I shared with you do not offer the right balance. Generally speaking, currently, we are talking too much and not giving students enough time to think about things and to think out loud and to compare their ideas with each other. And if we were to reduce the amount of time we talk, then there is a good chance that this will increase engagement, and especially amongst our at-risk and MLL students. Now, problem is often when I share this information with some teachers, they're like, that doesn't support what goes on in my classroom, so I don't want to know about it. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. I'm doing most of the talking right now. So funnily enough, you know, we could say, well, hang on a minute, you're talking far too much. But if we accept this, then it means that the next thing we need to do before we even think about quality, before we think about strategy, we need to think about opportunity. How much opportunity are we providing for our students to engage in really high quality dialogue that might just double the rate of learning and help them with those things that we want, particularly that general comprehension and that inference and reasoning that we want for all of our students.
So I think it's interesting, the statistics that you shared about the class size, that teachers talk more in smaller class sizes, but then also the idea that the more dialogue is so impactful in specialized classes. And I think there's that connection there. I think sometimes the smaller classes often are those specialized classes, and we have this idea that it's our job to funnel information into the students. So we just talk and talk and talk at them rather than letting them play with the language themselves to learn. And, you know, so it really, really connects all of those statistics that you were sharing, because of the idea that the students will talk more when the teacher talks less. I think it's about building that idea and that culture that is their job. It's their job of the students to talk, not the job of the students to sit there and take in information. So very key in those situations.
For sure. And of course, it's a mix of things, and we do need to give information, or we need to provide opportunities for students to get that information, but then how do they make sense of it? And dialogue is a key strategy for helping students to make sense of their learning, to make connections, to infer, to reason, to apply critical thinking, to comprehend what it is that they're hearing, what it is that they're seeing, what it is that they're noticing. Now, of course, number one is providing opportunity, making sure that there is time for dialogue, but then we need to make sure it's the right type of dialogue. And so let's look at what type of dialogue are we thinking about. And I like to compare it with Goldilocks porridge. There is dialogue that's just a little bit too warm. There's dialogue that's just a little bit too cold. And then there's dialogue that's just right. So the one that's too hot, we often refer to as cumulative. That means that it's just a little bit too nice. It's all about agreeing. Oh, yes, I agree with you. Oh, that's lovely. Yes, thank you very much. Somebody else. Oh, yeah, that's a really good contribution. Thank you. Oh, yes, that's very nice. And it's very, very nice, and it's very harmonious. And on the face of it, there's nothing wrong with it. And it does make people feel that they are valued. It does make them feel that they are included. So it's not bad, but there is better. The opposite, and the one that I would say is bad, is disputational, and that is too argumentative. It's about ego often. It's about who can point score, who can show that they're the funniest or the cleverest, and so on. And we see this emerging quite a lot, particularly in older grades. We see a lot of cumulative at elementary level. In fact, that is by far and away the most common form of dialogue in elementary, is cumulative. In middle, it's a bit of a mix, and at high school, unfortunately, we do see a bit more disputational. Nonetheless, at every grade level, the porridge that is just right, the dialogue that is just right, is what we'd call exploratory. And this engages critical thinking, it's constructive, it's challenging. I'm going to talk about some strategies for that very soon, but in a nutshell, it means we're not accepting, but we're not disputational either. We're inquisitive. So when a student offers an idea, we don't say, very good, that's right. We don't say, very good, well done. What we say is, interesting, can you tell me more? Or we say, oh, that's fascinating. So does that connect with what she said before? Or do you think that might be different to what he was talking about? Can anyone think of an example in which that would work again? Or do you think there's an example where it wouldn't work again? So it's about exploring those ideas rather than accepting them and praising them. Now, what's the effect? Well, when you look at focusing on exploratory talk, the impact can be astonishing. I'm going to share with you the impact with students after just 5 weeks of focusing a bit more on exploratory talk. This is not about taking kids off their normal lessons and just doing dialogue. It's just us thinking a bit more about dialogue. Whichever subject I'm teaching, whatever grade level I'm teaching, can I provide more opportunities for exploratory talk, and what might be the impact? Take a look at these. It's astonishing, the number of questions that students ask. Now, I see the number of questions that students ask as an indication, not the only one, but a strong indication of curiosity and of engagement. And I would suggest that we all want engaged students. And if they're shoving up their hand, or not even shoving up their hand, just indicating that they have a question and they're asking, so does that mean, or so could that be, or well, could you give an example, or is that the same reason? If they are asking questions, it shows, in my mind, it's a good indication of increased engagement. The number of reasons that they're giving, so reasoning would be right at the center of critical thinking, and there's something else that we would want from our students. It also, if you look at the speculations, that's astonishing, because they have to think about the information, they have to think about potential links, and then they have to say, so what if, and then make that connection. And that is a part of the inference, it's a part of the comprehension that we've talked about. And that final one, and hands up if anyone doesn't want that. I mean, we're talking about language learning here. I mean, quantity is a key part of this. Boost, that build their vocabulary, and it'll be a good thing. So exploratory talk is about engaging them in curiosity, about challenging, it's about questioning, it's about moving beyond the being very nice and accepting and saying very good, well done. And that's not to say, therefore, we do the opposite and we become hard to please. It's we go beyond the nice to, that's interesting, can you tell me more? Or what about? Or could it be? Or can anyone think of a reason? Or can anyone make a connection? So that's why I created the Learning Pit, as Maria mentioned in her introduction. I created many years ago to help my students be more willing to step out of their comfort zone, be more willing to reflect on their learning journey, to be more able to engage in dialogue with each other. And the idea of the Learning Pit is it tracks the journey when we move from a simple, singular idea into what I call the learning pit, Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development, but into that place where you've gone from knowing one or two things to having lots of ideas, but some of those ideas contradict and conflict with each other. And at that point, that's where the language really, really becomes very rich and exploratory and thought-provoking and nuanced, because the students are saying, oh, yes, but on the one hand this, but then on the other hand that, and then what about this? And your job is not to sort it for them. Your job is to keep them focused, keep the interest level going, and also encourage them to keep at it, so that eventually they sift out all of this information and start thinking it through together. And at that point, you teach them how to organize information, how to sequence it, how to group it, how to categorize it in some way. And that then helps them to come out of the learning pit with a much more complex, nuanced answer. And then ultimately what you do is you encourage them to apply and adapt those ideas into other circumstances. Now, I'm going to give some examples of this happening just in the last week. And we've got hundreds of examples, but let me just go for some from the last week. But for a moment, let me pause there and see if there's a comment or a connection that one of our illustrious team on the screen would like to make.
Sorry, I was waiting. I'm always ready to jump in, but I was going to let someone else. But again, I love the connection when I talked with Melissa about this with the multilingual learners. This idea of, so often we spend a lot of time, talking about vocabulary, adding a lot of information, but not that time to really play around with it and take what they already know and new ideas and create that more extension that you're talking about. So I'm really excited that you're sharing this and hoping that the multilingual teachers can see a lot of connections between what you're hoping to get from the students.
Sure. Thank you, Carmen. And well done for that wait time. That's something that you have been deliberately working on, I know, and you were horrified when we first came across Mary Budd Rose research, where she found that the average wait time after a teacher asks a question before somebody answers or the teacher repeats it in some way is 0.8 seconds. And I know, Carmen, you were a self-confessed junkie of filling silence. So bravo.
Yeah, I think mine was more like 0.4 seconds. So I think I beat that. Well that done. Average.
I think you waited at least 3 seconds there. So bravo. So one of the things that our team do, and Carmen is our managing director. We have about 25 people based in 6 different countries at the moment, or the 7th country is Japan, just coming on board now. But all of our team, one of the things that we do is demonstration lessons, partly because we just love working with the students. I mean, we're all teachers and that's our first love, our first passion, but also we think there's far too many consultants around who haven't been in classrooms in years and they keep telling you good ideas and you think, yeah, but does that really work with my kids? So we do demonstration lessons. So let me share some examples of this journey through the learning pit and what that looks like. And I'm just going to take examples from the last week or so, because fresh in my mind, but we've got lots more. So first one, this was in grade 1, and Carmen, as you can see, she's every grade 1 in Wales dresses in superhero costumes, as you can see. So you can imagine what Carmen thought when we walked into the school, and all these kids are just roaming around in superhero costumes. But anyway, it was a superhero day for some reason. So I don't know if you can see in the photograph, and let me draw attention to, you can see 3 plates. And on those 3 plates, Carmen said to these children, I have got 3 apples. I've got a juicy one, I've got a plastic one and I've got an invisible one. Now, how many of these apples do you think are real? And so what the children, as you might imagine, started with is, and I'm going to sort of track this across the learning pit. What they started was, well, there's 2 real apples. And Carmen said, why? Well, because you can see them. And she says, and you can't see them all? And said, no, you can't see the invisible one. So their singular idea at the beginning was that real things are things that you can see. So now it was Carmen's job to get them into the learning pit, to use exploratory talk, to question them, say, oh, that's interesting, but what about? And so an example, she asked one of the teachers, who also was dressed in superhero outfit, to leave the room. And this poor woman thought, what's wrong with me? Anyway, she trudged out and closed the door. And so Carmen then said, so your teacher's just gone. We can't see her anymore. Does that mean she's not real? And of course, the kids were thinking, well, of course she's real, because we know she's there, even though we can't see her. So this was Carmen's way of getting them to think, oh, yeah, so, okay. So the thinking that went through that session was real things can't always be seen, because we know the teacher's real, but we can't see her at the moment. So, well, that conflicts with the first idea that actually you have to see something to know it's real. And then even if you see something, it doesn't mean it's real, like a trick, you know, like when a magician does a trick, we know it's not real. Or we play Pokemon, you know, quite a lot of them are like enjoying the Pokemon. We know that's not real, even though we can see it. They're computer games that they play. They know that's not real, even though you can see it. So there's a conflict there. So Carmen was asking questions and got them to think about, well, how do we know that something's real, and got them to talk about their senses. But then she asked them about, well, what about things that science have found? So for example, our senses sometimes deceive us. We think we hear something, but then maybe we didn't, we imagined it. Sometimes we can see things in our dreams, but does that mean they're real? Science has found things that we can't see the naked eye. So we know there's atoms in the air, but we can't see them. Although one child did say, well, hang on a minute, you can see the air. When it's cold, you can see the air. It's just like, okay, but can you see the atoms in the air? And they decided, okay, science can help, but it hasn't found everything, because science is revealing things all the time. And some people disagree with science. I mean, she didn't get into the political sense. I mean, these were grade ones, for goodness sake. But these were the ideas. Can you see the language that these kids were using as they went into the pit? And she continued with them. And what they emerged with was this sense of, well, okay, we can use our senses and science to understand what is real. And that then led to them creating a real, not real continuum. And I want to share an example of that. I was in New Jersey pre-pandemic, and I was working in an elementary school, and I said that we do demonstration lessons. So they gave me 500 kids in the hall and said, there you go, there's some kids, work with them. And I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do with that then? So I did this real, not real continuum. And you can see the picture in the middle. I got some kids, and I had either end. I got one child to hold real and the other child to hold not real. And then we thought of things. And for example, I said a rainbow. Where would we put that? Would we put that towards the not real side or the real side? And anyway, they kept going and going and going. And the picture on the left, you can see me pointing at a girl, because like 20 minutes into it, there was still nobody stood next to her. There was loads stood next to the boy, but no one was stood next to the girl, and she was getting a bit lonely, and said, so can anybody think of something that's not real? And absolutely lovely, grade 5. And one of them shouted out Donald Trump's hair, which I just thought was tremendous. And so she was thrilled with that idea. Now, what we then got into is this continuum. Can we think of words and ideas that we can use that mean not real, and put them on a continuum towards the real. So we had things like non-existent was on one end and authentic was on the other, fake and actual. And we talked quite a lot about where we would put them on the continuum, and would we move them more to the middle, would we move them more to the side? And then we had these, these, and these. Can you see the language that this brings out, draws out? And remember, education, the word education comes from the Latin educare, which meant originally to draw out. Education is about drawing out. It's not about stuffing in. It's about drawing out, and I think dialogue is absolutely brilliant for that. Notice there's a couple of spaces, because what we also did was we made a link to language that we would use in maths. So for example, we talked about the difference between probable or probability and possibility, and we talked about where they would go on the continuum. Just look at the language that we're bringing out there. So that was grade 1. It's also grade 5. Let me give you a few more very quick examples, then I'll pause for some reflection from our panelists. So grade 2, last week, read them this book, The Tiger Who Came for Tea. Just look at some of the expressions on those kids' faces. I love the one where there's a girl towards the right-hand side. It's almost like, what the hell are you talking about? But anywho, I don't know if you know the story of the tiger who came for tea, but he was invited in for tea, and then this creature ate all their food and raided the cupboard and raided the fridge, and then drank everything, all the water from the tap, which completely puzzled the kids, because it's like, well, how does a tap run out of water? And we spent a lot of time talking about whether that was possible or not. Again, let me track the journey through the learning pit. Was the tiger being naughty? Their singular idea was the tiger was naughty, because the tiger ate everything. So the tiger was naughty. So through questioning, through that trying to create exploratory talk, getting them to give more reasons, to make connections, to create examples, me not saying, yes, that's right, or no, that's wrong, but saying, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more? These were some of the things. Well, it was naughty to eat all the food that the tiger ate, but hang on a minute, the tiger was invited. He just was a bit greedy, because, you know, it was offered a cake and then he ate all the cakes. So, you know, he wasn't invited to eat everything, but then, hang on a minute, he also went into the cupboards and took everything from the cupboards and took everything from the fridge. And this really got them. It's like, is it possible to drink all the water from the tap? And then, you know, but by him eating them out of house and home, the family then at the end went off for a nice meal. And it's like, well, that was a really nice opportunity to get out for something to eat. So they were trying to understand this. And eventually they came out the learning pit thinking, well, it was naughty to be greedy, but hang on a minute, do tigers even understand social rules? Do they understand that it's greedy to take everything? I mean, you know, maybe tigers just will eat whatever's put in front of them. So, you know, and so then we did a ranking activity on a scale of naughtiness. So, you know, we took the images from the book. I've got it here somewhere. Yeah. So we just took these, took the images, and we ranked them. Was that one naughtier than this one? How could we describe that? What's the language going on there? What are the terms that we could use here? Was the tiger being really greedy? Was the tiger being naughty? Was he being selfish? What's going on there? So we were using lots and lots of language there. Two more very quick ones, because I've taught elementary there. So let's get into middle school. Carmen last week, or a couple of weeks ago, teaching balance. Thank goodness she did this one, because it was all algebra related, which I know nothing about, but don't tell anybody that. So she started with this image and simply asked them, what do you notice? So straight away, she got them into dialogue. Turn and talk, what do you notice? And then drew out from them that, well, the singular idea was it's not balanced. That's what we can see there. But as she questioned them, as she got them into exploratory talk, then they were saying, well, yeah, but so balance means you have to have the same on either side. So if you had 2 blocks of cheese the same on either side, or 2 bananas either side, then it would be balanced. But then what she wanted to do was get them to think, well, it doesn't have to be a banana and a banana. It could be a banana on one side and maybe an apple and a few grapes on the other. So 2 different things on either side, but they could still balance. You can add to one side to balance. So at the moment, the image is not balanced, but you could add something to the right-hand side to balance it. Or, of course, you could take something away from the left-hand side to balance it. That objects could be swapped around. So she was drawing this out. This is not Carmen putting it into their head, it's drawing it out. And imagine the language and the connections and the explanations that the kids are having to make. And then then she got them back to math and thinking, right, okay, this equal sign, what does that mean? And so on. So as they came out of the pit, and of course, this is where I got completely lost. I mean, I've been loving the lesson up to this point, and then like balancing themselves and lifting their leg in the air and closing their eyes and all that sort of thing. But the moment Carmen started talking about algebra, I thought, okay, you're on your own here. But she got them to think about the various operations and then eventually to get into algebra and how can we balance this and what do we mean by that? Absolutely brilliant. And then finally, let me give you a quick high school example. I believe that Carmen set me up for this one because it was a grade 10 biology lesson, and I know even less about biology than I know about algebra, but thank you for that one, Carmen. It was really super. And so thankfully these kids were willing kids. I mean, you know, they're adults almost, but they were willing to play with me and to give me some stuff, and I was forever grateful for that one. And we got into living things, and so they told me that all living things breathe, excrete, reproduce, grow, and move. And oh, that's news to me. Thank you very much. And then I got them into the pit thinking, well, what about viruses then? Are they living things? And we connected it, of course, to COVID-19. Imagine how much imagination it took me to think of that example there. And then are they living or not? And then they told me, well, viruses are cellular, so they are living. And I was looking over desperately at the biology teacher for some confirmation that that was true or not. But then also that viruses are not living because they actually rely on a host, so they can't do it up by themselves without a host. You know, they don't reproduce, which is why the staying at home and staying away from people was a good thing to do. And then, but then there are some viruses who live outside a host, and they evolve and move from host to host, and so on. I'm like, blah. But then that helped them to come out of the learning pit with this thing of this was a really fascinating term, pseudo-alive. Now I'm thinking, did they even make that term up? But you know, the teacher was nodding very wisely, as was Carmen, that apparently that is a term, pseudo-alive. Now I'm a native English speaker and I'd never heard of that term, but hey ho, we persevere and we got the language from that. And from that, then we created a Venn diagram of living, non-living. And of course, what we needed to do is find examples in each of the 3 categories. So the category of non-living, the category of living, and then the category of the pseudo-living, where you could say it's kind of in the middle. So let me pause there. There's some examples of exploratory talk, taking the students through the learning pit, engaging them in dialogue to build their, amongst other things, to build their language skills, their explanation, their inference, their reasoning using that language.
So I love that you use this biology example because of just what you said. I mean, literally not James's thing at all. I mean, he walked into the room and just looked around the room to try to find out an initial question, and he looked at the learning outcome, and it was something about systems and functions, and that's how all of that got started. And so I think it's just a really good example that sometimes as educators, we're worried about getting deep into questioning about something that we don't know about. And I think this really demonstrates that in this case, literally James just kept, whatever they would say, he would take it and turn it or ask a question about what they were saying. It was not him delivering anything, but rather just anytime, like when he asked if they were viruses are cellular, so they're living. He would, well, what do you mean by cellular? And is everything that's cellular living? And are there any things that are living that aren't cellular? So just being able to know the kinds of questions to ask. And so I think that helps when teachers can see that, because they realize they can venture into something that maybe they don't have a lot of knowledge about, as long as they can get good questioning skills.
Awesome. I appreciate you saying that so much, because I know there are a lot of contents out there or concepts that we're not super comfortable with. But I wrote down something that James said in the chat, and it really stuck with me: drawing out, not stuffing in. And I think all of the language that's happening through all of these examples really shows students drawing upon their own knowledge versus, open brain, dump stuff in, close head. So I really appreciated that.
And in this case, they're using their own language. So it's that funds of knowledge as well. I mean, they're able to have these conversations using whatever language they are already comfortable with, not the language that we've already established for them around a certain concept.
I was just going to add that two of the things that really we've been heavily focused on here in Delaware, integrated English language development. So thinking about how in the content we can support our students and making sure that that language comes alive, and collaboration. So when we think about collaboration, and some of our educators who are maybe multilingual learner specialists, but maybe don't have all of the content knowledge and maybe hesitant to engage, this is a great way that those educators can also become involved in the practice and eliciting language from learners, and also just making sure that we're all learning from one another in those collaborative ways and embedding our content and language simultaneously throughout a student's entire day.
For sure. Actually, that, Maria, that connects to, if I go very briefly back to John Hattie's database, that was something else that, shall we say, upset people early on, that as if John Hattie was stating it as his opinion, when indeed he was just reporting what the research was saying, and that was that teacher subject knowledge, the effect is just 0.12. In other words, it really isn't the biggest factor at play. Relationships are way more important. And guess what? Funnily enough, pedagogy. Now, that's not to say that subject matter is totally irrelevant. It's to say that if you had to choose between expert pedagogy and expert subject knowledge, then actually in most, perhaps not all, but in most cases, pedagogy wins time and time and time again. If you can have both, then happy days. And I'm sure that I could have done a better biology lesson if I'd known what I was talking about. But it worked in that situation where it's this drawing out, it's that questioning, as Carmen was using the examples there, I was saying to them, so does that mean all cellular things are living? Or are all living things cellular? I didn't even need to know what I was talking about there just to take it and turn it. So it is fascinating. If we approach this with the sense of we're going to explore this with our students. Something else about this challenge idea, I was looking to create some sense of confusion. And I don't mean confusion to the point where they give up. I mean confusion in terms of, oh yeah, well, that's kind of a point. And oh, I hadn't thought about that. And oh yeah, that contradicts with that. I wanted that. Why? Because the research is super, super clear. The more we make it difficult for them, the more likely they are to remember it. It's as simple as that. If I make things easy, it will be easier to forget it. Whereas if I make things more challenging, if I make sure my students struggle with it, then they're going to be in a better position to remember it. Take a look at this. When learners do well on a learning test, they are likely to forget things more quickly than if they do badly on the learning task. Desirable difficulties enhance learning. And take a look at the name of this meta-analysis. I absolutely love the title. Making things hard on yourself, but in a good way. creating desirable difficulties to enhance learning. And final example on that particular topic, this is the work of Jo Bowler. I like her work, and not only because she also quotes my work, but you know, it's quite nice that she does. Take a look at this quote. The most productive classrooms are those in which students work on complex problems, encouraged to take risks, and can struggle and fail and still feel good about working on hard problems. We have to get them challenged. It's not, yes, encourage them, but it's not about helping them. It's about challenging them and encouraging them at the same time. So then that leads into thinking about, so what is the pattern of interaction in our classroom? The typical interaction in a classroom is where the teacher initiates, typically by asking a question. Students respond, generally speaking, by one or more of them giving an answer. And that's fine. Everything's fine so far. Where it falls down is where we have this propensity to evaluate. Too often we say, very good, well done, or no, can someone else give an answer? And that's where it falls down. So what we need to do is change away from evaluate to explore. And that means do not confirm or deny. Do not say, yes, very good, well done, or no, that's not right. Instead, invite more. Could you give me an example? Can you think of a reason why? Are there any exceptions to that? Do you think that always works? So is that the same as this? So anything we can do to engage our students more in dialogue. And the problem is when we evaluate, the kid who gave the right answer thinks, there you go, I'm done. And all the others think that question's gone. Whereas if we explore, they go, oh, right, well, yeah, but okay. And then we'll add this and, oh, that's interesting. The comparison or the example or the reason is this. So here are a couple of very quick strategies before I finish to share with you what that might look like. Could I ask all the panelists to unmute themselves and tell me which of these you think is the odd one out and why?
I'd say the salad. It's the healthier option.
Okay, so thank you for that. Why do you think the salad is the healthier option?
There's lettuce and tomatoes, and it's not fried.
Okay, so there's lettuce and tomatoes in with the burger, isn't there?
Yes.
That's why I thought that the fish and chips was the odd man out, because it doesn't have any vegetables.
Okay, so Maria, connecting that to Carrie's answer then, do you think therefore that it's not as healthy?
I don't know. I think the burger's probably unhealthy, and it looks like there might be mayonnaise on there, which is not healthy.
Melissa, could I ask you what you think your two colleagues mean by the term healthy?
I think it means that a healthy portion, or healthy means that it has nutrients and it gives you healthy nutrients to sustain.
So would you think that the fish and chips do not give you healthy nutrients?
Correct. I think the odd one out is the fish and chips, and the healthier version is the salad.
Okay, so fish isn't healthy, doesn't give you nutrients.
It does.
Looks like it's got breading on it, and it might be fried.
Okay, and does that make it bad or unhealthy?
Right? Like your arteries.
Okay, I'll pause there. So thank you very much to all three of you so that's an example of the sort of interaction that I'm talking about here. Notice I didn't say, yes, very good, well done, or no. notice I was looking to ask you to explain a little bit more. In fact, at one point, Melissa, I said, what do you think your two colleagues mean by healthy? So not only was I asking you, in fact, I wasn't asking you for your opinion as such. I was asking you to say what you think the others thought and to make connections and to go back to it. And so we can take anything. I mean, you know, odd one out is just a brilliant strategy because it fits into every single content area. It can be with objects. It can be, you know, for example, I love to put like 9 different things like that. And then I can either say, right, that group, you take row 1, this group take row 2, and that group take row 3, or column C, B, or A, or just pick 3 and then go for which is the odd one out and why. It lends itself brilliantly to the exploration. Notice though, it's not the strategy, it's how you run that strategy. You know, it's like the Bananarama thing. It's not what you do, it's the way that you do it. You know, we've got to get them to, so, okay, that's an example. That could you explain that more, and so on. The more we can move our students from that singular idea through the learning pit and out to make connections, the better. And one final thing before we finish. Those light bulbs, I use them when talking about the SOLO taxonomy. That stands for the structure of observed learning outcomes. And Biggs and Collis proposed that there was a move from pre-structural to unistructural, multistructural, relational, extended, abstract. And what they meant by that was moving from surface to deep, or we could call that knowledge to understanding. And that is where you move from having no idea about something to some idea, to lots of ideas, to connecting and relating those ideas to applying and adapting them in lots of different circumstances. Now, when you look at those light bulbs, let me draw your attention to the difference between the multistructural and the relational. Can you see how in the relational, those chords are interconnected, whereas in the multistructural, they're separate? That is at the heart of deep learning. If you want to know how to move your students from surface to deep, it's at the heart of it is about getting them to make connections. And that's what the odd one out is seeking to do. That's what taking them through the learning pit is aimed to do. That is what that exploratory talk is aimed at, is getting your students to take that, assimilate that language that you are teaching them, and then connect it in. Connect it to the vocabulary that they've learned before, into the sentence construction, into the meaning, into the inference. And worryingly, very worryingly, Janet Clinton's research shows that 90% of lessons, 90% of questions, and 90% of tasks set in lessons are at surface level. That is where kids are building lots and lots of vocabulary, but they're not building understanding. That's where they're getting lots of knowledge, but they don't understand how to use that in practice. And so what we're aiming to do, what we ought to be aiming to do, is help them to move from surface to deep. And it's not an either or. They have to learn the surface first. They do need the vocabulary, as we well know. They need that vocabulary, they need that knowledge, but then they need the opportunity to learn how to use it, how to connect it, how to apply it in different ways. And so it's that initiate, respond, explore, take them through the learning pit, create exploratory talk with your students, and we will be doing a very good thing with our students. I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you to the panelists. And as far as I'm concerned, at 11 p.m, it's definitely wine o'clock. But I'm sure for all of you, as soon as this conference is over, it's wine o'clock as well. So thank you very much. Let me remind you of that bit.ly link down the bottom right, where Carmen, when she gets near a Wi-Fi somewhere, will be able to put the updated set of slides on for you. Right now, there's the preset, but you'll get the full set later. But thank you very much indeed for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. There's I'm spinning with how many connections there are with the work that these amazing leaders are doing with high quality education for multilingual learners, and the disciplinary practices and the language that come together. Absolutely important. Thank you, Carrie. Carrie's putting the link for tomorrow morning's session in the chat. Carmen, thank you so much for all of your examples as well. Just
Thank you. I enjoyed being with you.
A lot of great
amazing.
comments in the chat. And as Carrie said, tomorrow morning, we'll start off with some collaborative time for folks to synthesize what they heard tonight and also move into how this all connects with what we're going to be learning throughout the day tomorrow. So please do join us at 8:30 for that session. And then we'll have sessions going on throughout the day where you'll have a chance to learn from national experts as well as other leaders here in the state of Delaware who are doing great work to continue to move toward equity for our multilingual learners. We thank you for a great afternoon/evening, and we hope you have a great one. And we will see you tomorrow morning.
Yes, absolutely. And everything will be posted on the website. So make sure you head over to Abstract to Action and you'll find all of that information and follow up. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Thank you. Let me know if there's any